First time I voted when I was 20. I voted for members of parliament and I felt very proud.
I voted in elections in my country for as long as I can remember. The first time I voted, I was probably 19, 20 years old.
The very first time I voted, I was 17. It was for a presidential election. In Brazil, the vote's mandatory once you're 18 years old and optional between 16 and 17 years of age. So I voted then.
I voted for the first time in 2019 in the general elections in Nigeria, and I was 32 years old when I voted.
I voted in 2008 for the very first time after Musharraf regime. It was my first ever experience.
In our country, women got the right to vote only after the Second World War. My mother was born in a world where women could not yet vote. Women voted for the first time in 1948. If you think about it that way, my mother being born in that kind of world, it's like it was yesterday, and all these changes happened just very, very recently.
ما نخرج الكل، كنت ما نمشيش نخب جملة وما نعطيش بها بال جملة، ما كنتش نعطيها حتى همي. خلاني نتراجع فكرة السفيريات كي جوني وكل شيء وحكوا معاي وكل شيء وخرجت، زدت وليت تحمست أكثر. ومن بعديش وليت متحمسة، وليت كل حاجة نعطيها همي، وليت نحب نخرج، وليت نحب ماذا بيا نقنع حتى امرأة أخرى ماذا بيا نقنعها.
The first time I voted was when I was 20 years old for President of the United States, and I've voted in every single election since then.
Actually, the first time I voted, I was 18 years old.
The first time I voted, I was 23 years old.
I first voted when I was 18. And at that time, New Zealand had just changed from a first-past-the-post electoral system to mixed member proportional, or MMP, which means we vote for both a candidate and for a party.
I always vote. Since I turned 18, I have never missed any local or national elections.
Gran satisfacción. Gran satisfacción. Me sentí, mira, siento todavía la piel de gallina. Me sentí tan orgullosa, tan bien. Yo había puesto mi voto y había hecho saber a quién votaba y cómo pensaba. Era una persona entera.
जी मैंने 2 दफ़ा इलेक्शन में वोट दिया है। पहली दफ़ा मैंने 2013 के जनरल इलेक्शंस में वोट दिया था और दूसरी दफ़ा मैंने खैबर पख्तूनख्वा प्रोविंस में जो लोकल गवर्नमेंट इलेक्शन हुए थे 2015।
I have participated in local self-government elections when I was 18, and since that, no elections were conducted without me voting.
Yes, I feel my vote makes a difference because as a citizen of Nigeria, it gives me an opportunity to exercise my civic right and then also to create a change in my community by choosing the right leaders.
I always motivate youth to be active, as each vote shows each citizen's political will and participation in democratic processes.
I'm really proud of the fact that New Zealand was the first country in the world to give women the vote. I believe that our vote matters in the sense that we get to choose who is in place in government, who helps provide access to good services that are available to everyone in society.
I believe that the voice of every woman can improve the lives of others. Voting in the election is about having our own voice, to be in charge and impactful.
Cada persona hace diferencia. Es importantísimo utilizar todos los derechos, así como cumplir con todos los deberes. Todos tenemos las obligaciones y derechos.
Yes, I'm a strong proponent of democracy, and I always vote whenever elections are held. I have to defend my country. I have to defend democracy by voting.
As an African American woman, we didn't get the right to vote when all other females did. And so those women in my family who came before me, those women in my family who paved the way for me, made sure that they participated. You know, in order for us to make a difference, we have to make sure that if we're not at the table, you know, we'll be on the menu, and we have to make sure that we are at the table.
In terms of going to vote, we're also an exceptional country in the sense that we have mandatory voting. That is to say, people can actually get fined if they don't show up on election day to vote.
The right to vote is important to me because it affords citizens an opportunity to exercise their civic right. It also makes citizens to participate in the governance of their affairs through their elected representatives. My vote makes a difference because I get to contribute to the kind of leadership that I desire for my country.
The right to vote is important to me because I want to make sure I can pick representatives, I can pick leaders who have good ideas that are compatible with what I want for my country. People who are actually motivated to make the country a better place for all its citizens.
चूँकि मैं पिछले 20 साल से वोटिंग राइट जो है उसके लिए अवेयरनेस पे भी काम कर रही हूँ, तो अहमियत तो है। इससे हमें ये मौका मिलता है कि हम अपने लिए राइट नुमाइंदा मुंतखब करें और राइट नुमाइंदगान को हम असम्बलियों में, पार्लियामेंट्स में भेजें ताकि वो आवाम के बेनिफिट के लिए फैसले करें। और इसके अलावा जो है आईन पाकिस्तान का जो फर्स्ट चैप्टर है बेसिक ह्यूमन राइट्स, वो भी ख़वातीन को जो है पॉलिटिकल पार्टिसिपेशन और वोट का हक देता है।
We should be free to choose who governs us in societies, and if those people make bad choices for our country and us as individuals, we have the opportunity to vote them out of office.
The right to vote is important to me because by voting I feel my influence.
Voting is very important to me. I always vote. Voting allows me to participate in the democratic process, and it's an important part of my being a citizen of the United States. In fact, my mother, who was born in 1924, only 4 years after women gained the right to vote in the United States, she and I both view it as so important. We actually went to vote a mere few days before the state of Illinois shut down because of COVID-19, but it was important for her and me to vote in this election.
There are few women candidates in our elections. For instance, in the last general elections of 2019, we had a total of 20,442 candidates, out of which only 3,032 were women, which is a mere 12.9%.
Also, many women with special needs do not have information about elections, and they see very few female candidates who run for the offices. Also, they need to believe that they can make changes in their communities and in the world.
We have today a good representation of women in the parliament thanks to the introduction of quota on electoral lists. This leads to good results in terms of quantity. It does remain difficult for women to get access to the informal spaces of the most important politicians, those who actually determine the course of action and the policy. Also, we rarely, if at all, have equal representation of women in the executive, so in the government. And only just now do we have our first female Prime Minister, and she got the opportunity only thanks to a very specific crisis situation. So it's not as if all our problems are solved.
In my area, I don't remember any woman face on the ballot paper. Yes, women go door to door for campaigning because elections are all about numbers. So more women are involved in the whole process. But when it comes to power, you won't see any woman face.
More and more women are running for office in the United States. In fact, in 2018, all previous records were shattered. 476 women ran for Congress and 61 women ran to be governor. Even though more women are running for office, unfortunately, that hasn't translated into women who actually hold elective office in the United States. Only 24% of members of Congress are women, and for women of color, the numbers are even less. Only 9% of members of Congress are women of color.
Just few of us were empowered to run for the public offices and were elected, but that's too few to make a notable change. Sadly, politics is still to be considered a man's domain in Ukraine. Our voices are often not loud enough, and lots of changes have to be made before we are able to fully engage in the political life of the country.
Women's participation is critical as 52% of Georgia's population is women.
There are many women who run for public office. Yes, there are a lot of them who run for public office, but there are few who are elected. In the upper chamber, that's the Senate, there are 109 senators. Out of these 109 senators, 102 are men. Only 7 are women. That's a very small number. And then in the House of Representatives, we have 360 seats that are occupied by the parliamentarians. Out of these 360 seats, women only occupy 13 of those seats. You would agree with me that having 20 women in the legislature is quite a small number. Out of over 400 seats in the federal legislature, women occupy only 20 of those seats. And they are not even in the decision-making positions in such a way that decisions are even taken about them, for them, by the men most of the time. So that also is a challenge.
There are not many women running for elections in Brazil, and even fewer actually getting elected. In 2018, only 30% of the registered candidates were women. And right now, only 15% of the seats in the Chamber of Deputies are actually occupied by women. Women in Brazil, when they do assume positions of power, they're often intimidated, threatened, and even worse. 2 years ago, a Black lesbian municipal councilor was assassinated as she was leaving an event where she was talking about the rights of Black women in Brazil. So we need to make sure that that kind of violence is completely eliminated so women can play an equal role in the political sphere.
They started voting in the 1960s after the independence of Mali. But most of the time they were cheerleaders. They were just behind men who were trying to get them to mobilize votes for them. Along the way, they were able to raise their consciousness, raise their awareness and give them a toolbox to be able to compete in the political process.
नहीं मैंने जो वोट्स दिए हैं या जो इलेक्शंस मेरे सामने हुए हैं उसमें जनरल सीट्स जो है उस पर कोई खातून उम्मीदवार नहीं थी मेरे हलके में और ज़्यादातर ख़वातीन जो है वो रिज़र्व सीट्स पे ही आती हैं। तो जो लोकल गवर्नमेंट इलेक्शंस होते हैं उसमें भी पिछली दफ़ा जो है वो रिज़र्व सीट्स पे ही ख़वातीन आई हैं। इस दफ़ा उम्मीद कर रहे हैं कि अगर जनरल सीट पे जिस तरह कानून बना है कि 5% टिकट्स जो है वो सियासी जमातें ख़वातीन को देंगी, तो अगर इस पे अमल हुआ तो फिर मैं कोशिश करूँगी कि मैं जो खातून उम्मीदवार होगी तो उसको वोट दूँगी।
When we changed our electoral system to MMP, this greatly increased the number of women who are now in Parliament in New Zealand. We have also had 2 occasions now when all of the 3 top jobs in the country were held by women: the Prime Minister, the Chief Justice, and the Governor General.
There aren't as many women in the Senate, but in the political process, I think my voice is equal. We just have to know that and get out and do something about it.
Every time I vote, I have to overcome many obstacles. Informational barriers and inaccessibility of voting process for blind and visually impaired people are just some of many examples. Aside from me, hundreds of thousands of women with disabilities who can't access polling stations, who can't communicate in sign language, who can't cast a ballot personally and in secrecy. Being a woman and having a disability is a double no for those who consider running for the public office.
Women from ethnic and religious minorities have trouble to vote. In some communities, women participate in family voting.
I am an enrolled member of the Cherokee Nation and I'm Native American. While I personally do not experience barriers to voting, unfortunately, Native Americans still experience significant barriers to voting. Native Americans didn't even become citizens of the United States till 1924, and they weren't allowed to vote in several states till many decades later. And even today, unfortunately, there's still barriers to Native Americans fully participating in the democratic process, such as failure to accept tribal IDs and lack of polling places.
My voice is not equal to that of men in our political process. This is because the political space is dominated by men, and their voices have basically drowned that of the few women who are in that space.
As a woman from the group of persons with disabilities, I know many women with special needs who do not vote in elections. Especially blind persons have difficulties in physically accessing the polling stations.
We still have challenges around equal pay, around domestic violence, and while we have great maternity provisions, there would still be additional measures we could put in place around child care and equaling the playing field so that more women could be in office.
So it's much harder for women to access resources and to obtain the political support of political parties.
I generally do vote, but because of legal gaps, I, as an internally displaced person, could not fully participate in all elections for the last 6 years. We were deprived of the full exercise of our political rights.
When you want to talk about how women are also disenfranchised within the political party structure, the cost of nomination forms in Nigeria within the political party is quite high. And the issue of internal party democracy makes it also difficult for them to get into that space as candidates, being that the selection process is usually not democratic. The positions within, they are not even within the decision-making positions in the political party. At best, they will be given the position of the woman leader. So I feel that women don't have the same voice like the men in Nigeria within the political space.
Yes, I encourage all my fellows, friends, neighbors to cast their votes and not to blame the government afterwards. This is the time to turn up and to change the system. I am a free citizen of Pakistan. I reserve the right to vote. Voting is important because I'm important. I have to be responsible. I am an agent of change.
What I think we need for the future is a general realization that it is very important for women to be present in these places of power, and more attention from men and women who are there already on the inside in terms of mentoring and coaching. What I find is also that some political parties can play a key role in that. I was elected on the list of the Green Party. The Green Party had quota on its electoral list long before they became mandatory by law in our country, and also applies them on the entire list, so more than what is required by law. And there is an atmosphere in that party that really puts a lot of emphasis on this. It's very, very important. So what we see is also our voters tend to elect more women than men.
ثم تلقاها حاضرة عندها بطاقة تعريف، ثم تحب تسجل، ثم تحب تنتخب، تقول فرصتي أنا راني قبل رانا عازفين للانتخابات القديمة في عهد قديم، وكل رانا بنحب رافضين. قلت لهم أنا حتى كنت كيفكم رافضة، ما حبيتش نحكي معاه، ما حبيتش، أما قنعوني، أما افهموا أنتم روحكم باش تفرضوا وجودكم، باش تكون المرأة الريفية تعمل قيمة لبلادها وروحها ولصغارها وكل تستفيد، حتى صغارها تستفيد منها. هكا وقلت لهم زيادة إفادة برد في افهموا وشوفوا رواحكم ودخلوا الساعة، ودخلوا الانتخابات باش تفرضوا رأيكم.
I think we could encourage more women to vote and to run for elections by educating them how ordinary women were able to accomplish great victories for the society. Also, media must show more women role models from the public life.
I think that we could encourage more women to vote and run for election by significantly reducing the cost of seeking party nomination, which is quite exorbitant. And then secondly, the candidate selection process itself needs to be more democratic and more transparent than it currently is. And then thirdly, we need to address the issue of political violence, especially violence that is specifically targeted at women because of their gender and because of their desire to run for political office. We also need to change sociocultural norms that favor male dominance, thereby entrenching patriarchy. More needs to be done to create awareness around the benefits of having women in elected offices. And we also need to do more to challenge the negative stereotypes of women's leadership.
أيسوا شو وليداتي والله لما يجيكم وقت وإن شاء الله تشوفوا تونس وراهي تتقد تونس ونحطوا اليد في اليد ولا عمركم تقايسوا ولازم نقولي زعما يا حاج نقولوا راس ولدي امشي نخب واعطي صوتك واعطي صوتك واختار اللي تحب عليه انت ان شاء الله بقدرة ربي راي نولوا بالكدا وان شاء الله تونس لاباس.
Women, especially those with disabilities, should have all the opportunities to vote and to be elected, to receive necessary knowledge and education, to influence the decision-making process. I believe that democratic states cannot evolve otherwise. Unless women with disabilities are widely represented in politics, our voices will remain unheard and quiet, our needs will remain unseen, and our rights will not be sufficiently protected. We need to stand for each other if we want to flourish. We need to support each and everyone in being active in the political process of our countries. Voting and running for public offices is what we can do here and now. Let's fight for our right.
I think it's very important to encourage more women to run for elections. And we can encourage by providing incentives, by providing more resources and opportunities for them to build and display their platforms, more visibility to women's issues that need to be voiced, and especially by preventing all kinds of violence against women in all its forms.
Participatory democracy needs representation of diverse women's voices. I trust in my vote, no matter what happens in the world. I believe there is no crisis which can stop citizens from going and voting.
In recent years, we've seen women marching for women's rights. And even in recent weeks, we've seen lots of women, including a lot of younger women, marching following the death of George Floyd and marching for racial injustice. Unfortunately, this hasn't necessarily translated to voting. And as former President Barack Obama said, it's not an either or proposition, it's a both and. So if women want to see the policies they care about translated into law, they need to vote.
ရွေးကောက်ပွဲမှာအမျိုးသမီးတွေတချို့အမျိုးသမီးတွေဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ကြောက်တာတော့ယွန်းတာတော့တစ်ချက်နေရလူတွေဆိုရင်နည်းနည်းလေးអော်လိုက်တာနဲ့ကြောက်ပြီးတော့မထည့်တာမျိုးတွေပေါ့အပေးစကားပြောချင်တာကတော့မိမိဟာနိုင်ငံသားတဦးဖြစ်တယ်မွေးရပါလူအခွင့်အရေးတရက်ဖြစ်တဲ့အတွက်ကျမတို့ကဒီမဲကိုပေးပြအောင် ပေးကြပါလို့တိုက်တွန်းအားပေးချင်ပါတယ်ရှင်
Every vote makes difference, and my vote makes difference. And this message was on my bracelet, my wrist, during many years of our struggle for political rights.
Around the world, we need good democratic governments more than ever. Please protect yourselves and take care of your health, but please go out and vote.
I remember a while ago I had a Caucasian American gentleman tell me that I should not vote because the system was crooked. And as I told him that the women in my family have paved the way for me, and if the women in my family have paved the way for me, as well as other women, I just won't look at my family. I have to look at all women in general have paved the way for women to have the vote. And there is no way that I am not going to exercise that right. Regardless of the fact, regardless if I have to stand in line for 6 hours to vote, I will. I am reminded always of the individuals who stood in line when Nelson Mandela got his freedom and ran for president. And some of those individuals stood in line as long as 24 hours, if not longer. And if they can stand in line that long, I know I can stand in line for a few hours and cast my vote. So I will, no matter what. It is a privilege. It is an honor, to vote. And I will always, until the day that I die, exercise that right.